So here we are. Do we need to do something funny for balance? I mean, it's the top spec in raid, pretty high up in dungeons. And if you don't know that already, then with the talents, rotation, covenants, and legendaries, you are in for a pleasant surprise. Techno Chicken engaged! You too can be a sexy space techno chicken, or at least look like one. Wait, no. Look at a sexy space chicken. Yeah, that's the one. The CurseForge client will help you do that. We like how easy it is to use. One button and all of your add-ons are updated automatically. It doesn't need to run in the background, so you can close it right after you install the new add-ons and updated the olds. The CurseForge client devs are super active with the updates, bug fixes, quality of life improvements, doing weekly releases with patch notes and newsletters to improve the app constantly. Thanks to the CurseForge client and the devs for making our UIs cooler, for getting add-on creators a platform to put their work on, and of course, for sponsoring this video. And now, transition! A quick note before we begin. We covered the basics and fundamentals of the spec. The info should be more than enough to get your ahead of the curve and maybe your Keystone Masters achievements. There's a lot more to the spec that we cannot cover in one video, and for that we want you to check out the Dream Grove Discord community. As for the talents, finally, Nature's Balance will be your overall pick on the first row. It's your go-to choice in both raiding and mythic key scenarios. It passively generates astral power while in combat, and when outside, instead of depleting to 0, it will regulate to 50, so you always have gas in the tank. Nevertheless, depending on your tank, in dungeons you could really get Force of Nature. The reason you want it is not because it sims a bit more in single target, and yeah, it does generate some astral power, but really you want it for the AoE taunt. The meta right now sees tanks take incredible amounts of damage. Being able to take a breather for a few seconds, get out of active combat to drop some debuffs, or simply have an easier time kiting is invaluable in mythic dungeons, and without overselling it too much, it can save you keys. Second row is more of a utility / survivability row. We recommend Wild Charge in any and all scenarios. Specifically in BOOMKIN form, Wild Charge lets you leap backwards. Not only will this be enough to get out of an incoming attack, it's also super great for positioning and keeping your distance from your targets. In the raids, there are situations where Tiger Dash can help when doing mechanics that require a burst of speed, like Seeds on Artificer, dropping a puddle out of the raid with minimal downtime on your rotation, say Shriekwing, and so on. Same thing about Renewal. Sludge Fist, although nerfed, still damages the raid hard on both pillars and chain pulls, and popping a quick heal saves your healer's mana and time. Essentially, pick what you want as long as you can make good use out of it and not just turn this row into a no-value row. Next up, another row that's debatable. The idea with these types of rows is to pick what you can use efficiently to get actual value out of it. A general pointer is that Resto Affinity will be best for all content if you are not too sure. It gives you a few healing spells to use in case shit, because at the end of the day, you are a druid. You need to be comfortable swapping forms and helping your group out with what utility you can offer, and off heals will help your healer get a breather, every now and again. Maybe even save the group with Heart of the Wild. Not to mention the passive healing is never not useful, although there are a few mechanics that prevent or limit healing, in which case the passive and subsequent value of the talent will drop. For those mechanics that also sees periodic bursts of damage, Guardian Affinity would be the choice for the damage reduction you would get from Thick Hive. This seems to perform better in raids where bursts of damage intake happens often enough where the 6% damage reduction is actually returning value. These are what we recommend, but play with all of them. Personally, I like Resto Affinity with the Heart of the Wild talent to be a decent healer for 45 seconds to help my group out. And speaking of which, Heart of the Wild is next on the list. This is a personal favorite of mine and a pretty good choice in raids and dungeons. Simply pop it, then do a Wild Growth on an injured group of people, supposing you have Rest Affinity, spread a few rejuves, pop a Swiftman on the tank or whoever is close to dying, and boom! Healing cooldown for DPS. This is what I feel makes a druid feel like a druid. Not just a space chicken, but a tree on some days as well. Otherwise, there are instances where Mass Entanglement is really good to keep adds in place. It helps the tank kite and also prevents mechanics like mobs eating smaller mobs to get fatter, and rooting them away gives you time to kill the big dude before it's too late. Works on self-destruct bots in the other side as well. Your imagination is the limit, and game design, but mostly the first thing. Next up, when doing raids and pure single target, go with Star Lord. This will give you a small stacking buff of haste every time you Star Surge or Starfall. Starting at 4%, you can get it up to 12%, but every time you add a stack, its duration does not extend. So in an ideal world, you want to cast 3 back-to-back Star Surges to get as much uptime on the 12% haste as possible, after pulling Astral Power, which is actually how your main rotation will want you to play. Take advantage of the legendary power you will be using. So if anything, Star-Lord fits the rotational flow you want to strive to master. There are other intricacies in the rotation that will make it a challenge to balance all of these out, but that's the beauty of balance, you can always do more. For any scenario with more targets or strictly in dungeons, go with Soul of the Forest. Mostly this baby will buff Starfire to be so strong and heavy AoE that it could and would outclass even Star Surges. But what you need to remember is that with this talent, your AoE DPS pump phase will see you in Lunar Eclipse spamming Starfires. A similar argument goes into the next row. Stellar Flare on pure single target will see a small DPS increase. As opposed to BFA, this is not that big of a single target DPS increase, but if your aim is to min-max, then this will be a good addition. It will start to lose out to Stellar Drift pretty quickly the more targets are out. So on anything with more than one target, basically anything but 4 of the Nathria bosses, Stellar Drift will be a better DPS option. Not only that, the fact that you can cast while moving is an added DPS increase on its own, something you cannot do with Flare, even on pure single target, since the dot itself has a cast time on top of it all. Lastly, take Solstice. Yes, no, New Moon is still dogshit because it's cool. That's why. Solstice is a new talent that took the place of Shooting Stars, which was a BFA cookie cutter talent and now a baseline passive for you. It is still a neat talent to have, puts the value of Sunfire and Moonfire high enough where maintaining them is still a goal, considering how much more damage putting globals into Starfire and Wraths is. Nevertheless, it's a passive, not much to manage, and you just want more damn, so pick it. For stats, consumables, and most gear choices, there is no correct answer regarding what is best. If you are interested in min-maxing and getting everything out of your space chicken, sim with raidboss.com. Nobody should tell you otherwise. If you are not that interested in getting every single gear piece right, a good model to follow, and I said follow, not the be-all and all of all stats, is to go Intellect first. Intellect is surprisingly strong for balance actually, and with it, it means eye level will be above all else, since the higher the eye level, the more intellect the item has. After that, if there are 2 pieces of the same item level, haste followed by mastery will perform a bit better, followed by versatility and crit at the bottom. This is just a point of reference in a vacuum. The covenant you join will matter and change the priority. Kyrian prefers haste more by default, but if you go Night Fae and or you play with the double on-use trinkets, which we will go over in a second, haste will be pretty bad and hence scale probably worse than versatility, since neither Night Fae, the ability, nor the double trinket play scales off of haste. One thing to keep in mind is that stats have diminishing returns in Shadowlands, and that starts with 35% if I'm not mistaken. It's unlikely you will reach that at least in Season 1, but it is something to keep in mind. Taking that into consideration, Celestial Guidance will be the overall best enchant for your weapon. If you want to maximize once again pure single target, Sinful Revelation could be better. I'm saying could because on my low eye level chicken, Celestial Guidance sims better on single target as well. So either go with Celestial or sim yourself and find out if it's better. Get Eternal Insight for single target raids mostly, or Eternal Stats for AoE scenarios for optimal gain. Oh, and a Desolate Armor Kit for your chest. The enchant speaks for itself, while the armor kit extends your HP pool. This is useful when pushing hard content, where every bit of HP matters, especially when learning mechanics. Not to mention that your Rest Affinity passive heal scales with your HP, so there. Incentive enough? For your bracers, get Eternal Intellect, clearly, and for your cloak, we recommend Fortified Leech. You can get Soul Vitality for the same reason as mentioned before, but Leech is usually a much more useful stat by its design, saves your healer some mana since you have more HP, but the damage you take is still damage that needs to be resolved, and well, enough about Leech. Fortified Avoidance can return a lot of value as well in raids where there's almost always constant AoE damage. This enchant will net you around 2% consistent damage reduction, so that's still pretty good. Haste will probably lose out in value to Mastery with a bit more eye level and if you play Night Fae again, which we will recommend soon enough. So we definitely also recommend Masterful Jewel Cluster for your sockets and Tenet of Mastery for the rings. These are easily replaceable with their haste counterparts if you switch to Kyrian, or if for whatever reason haste sims higher, or any other secondary stat if it ever gets to a point where it becomes your best secondary stat. As for your alchemical needs, Potion of Spectral Intellect will be your overall best choice here for all content. There might be an argument for the Potion of Phantom Fire for pure single target, but you are better off testing or simming it to see. Usually it might only be good if you are not a Night Fae Druid and or not using the double unused trinkets. The flask will be the Spectral Flask of Power, as with any DPS spec for that matter, and the Shadow Core Oil for your weapon, which might be what warrants the use of Phantom Fire as a potion on single target fights. Ideally you want to eat the Feast always, since raw intellect will be at least twice the damage on a point-by-point comparison with the secondary stats, at least at the beginning of your gearing journey. Otherwise, if it's more affordable, get Iridescent Ravioli with applesauce for the 30 mastery. There are currently two covenants that closely compete with each other. Kyrian is the least popular one, but performs well in high mythic dungeon keys. Taking Pelagos as the soulbind with the 2 potency unlocked path will be your best Kyrian option, but let's be honest, you want to convoke all day. Night Fae performs better in raids and single target and does a pretty good job in dungeons as well if played right. Right now, the top boomies out there that clear the highest keys and kill the toughest mythic bosses seem to prefer Night Fae. Although Kyrian can be better in large AoE fights with a lot more coordination, Convoke also adds a really nice spin to the class, and since the differences are so small, we recommend Night Fae overall. The soulbind you will want will be Nia, and the path you will unlock for your build sees you get Nia's tools Burrs, which will provide more damage than a normal balanced potency conduit will. As such, your first potency, and probably only one, will be Conflicts of Elements to buff up that Convoke the Spirit's skill for even more damage. If you need or want more potency conduits in your build, Fury of the Skies is next in line in terms of damage, followed by Umbral Intensity if you want a different covenant than Night Fae. Some really good endurance conduits to pick from are Well-Honed Instincts and Tough as Bark, while for the finesse slots go with Front of the Pack and Born Anew. This should fill any empty slots in your soulbind if you go Night Fae, but if you want to experiment with something else, well, the world is your oyster. Never got that. Are oysters good? Why would you want to eat the world? Anywhere. With trinkets, it's important to know that, again, you want to sim the ones you have if you want to make sure which is better. Obviously, you can follow your stat priority for any simple stat-giving trinkets. Alternatively, there is now a combination of a few trinkets that you can have where you can use both at the same time. Kind of. It's called double on use. Imperial Ordnance is the most important one here. You fire generic damage missiles at your target for 12 seconds, after which they return to you, giving you an intellect buff for 15 seconds. That intellect buff can be combined with another trinket that gives you a stat buff. Inscrutable Quantum Device is one of the best contenders, but Instructor's Divine Bell is also very high up there, possibly to replace the unreliability of the trinket, or the aptly or more commonly known as the question mark trinket. Alternatively, Kabbalist Hymnal is a great replacement for the Ordnance. The idea of using the on-use trinkets, both of them at the same time, kind of, is that the first one needs to have its effect overlap with the second, considering there's a 20-second interval cooldown between trinket usage. So usually effects that last over 20 to 30 seconds will match this criteria. Your raid legendary will be Balance of All Things, and honestly this seems to perform pretty freaking good in Mythic Keystones as well if you're Night Fae. So if there's one you want to use above all else, craft this one first. The legendary will also alter your rotation, and it's what adds the extra depth to the spec, which is always nice to see. Essentially, you will get a 40% crit chance increase once you enter an eclipse, which decays over 5 seconds. This means you want to spam your Star Surges at the beginning of any eclipse to get as much of that crit into the biggest hitter as possible. It also means you want to prioritize eclipse uptime above all else, meaning you should almost never cast anything outside of an eclipse. You are either in an eclipse or working towards your next one. This gets an extra value with Nightfall since the second you enter an eclipse you want to pop Convoke, meaning it would get the bonus from the crit right off the bat. And since Mastery is so good for Convoke and your general damage, having Nia as a soulbind with Grove Invigoration will give you a buttload of Mastery that adds on top of your crit to give Convoke even more damn. The synergy is real. A more recognizable one will be Primordial Arcanic Pulsar. This is the BFA Azurite trait that made it into a Lego. Every 300 astral power spent, aka every 10th Star Surge or 6th Starfall cast, as far as their cost is concerned, you get 12 seconds of Celestial Alignment, meaning both eclipse effects up. This can be timed or somewhat planned within dungeon packs since the legendary will be ideally used in mythic dungeons. This is usually better if you go Kyrian since with Nightfall, specializing on single target damage, with Prideful and how hard tyrannical bosses are, both, balance of all things, will be better in Mythic Plus if you are Nightfall. Without the legendary, you want to precast 2 Wraths before combat starts to get Eclipse. Apply Sunfire, Moonfire, and cast Stellar Flare. Use Starfire to get to 90 astral power, pop Celestial Alignment, cast 3 Starges back to back. Assuming you don't have the legendary and are not Nightfall, this is the general opener. If you are Necrolord, you apply Adaptive Swarm after Stellar Flare, or pop Ravenous Frenzy and Kindred Empowerment after Celestial Alignment. To clarify, this is the opener with balance of all things. Precast 2 Wraths prior to combat with an instant Star Surge after. Cast another Star Surge. Apply Sunfire, Moonfire, and Stellar Flare. Pop Celestial Alignment and Convoke the Spirits. Use Star Surge 3 times after Convoke is done. The idea here is that both in these openers you are running Nature's Balance. That way, the 2 Wraths should get you to 62 astral power and in Lunar Eclipse activating your legendary crit buff. The 2 Star Surges are there to consume that astral power with the max amount of crit possible. The other thing is that Convoke will generate a lot of astral power, and not filling your bar before Celestial assures you don't waste any more power than you have to. Also, popping Convoke right after Celestial makes it so that those 4 seconds of channel uptime will overlap with the legendary crit buff. The rest is pretty self-explanatory. Onto the 4 targets, apply Sunfire on stacked enemies. Maintain Starfall, apply Moonfire if targets will live through the next Solstice cycle, cast Starfire in Lunar Eclipse while also making sure you don't overcap power with Star Surge, cast Wrath in Solar, and spend Astral Power on Star Surges. On 5+ targets, apply Sunfire on stacked enemies, maintain Starfall, cast Starfire in Lunar Eclipse even at the cost of overcapping Astral Power, and in Solar apply Moonfires and cast Wraths. At 5+ targets, you can cast Starfire over Wrath, Nathria Moonfires, and for every 20% of mastery you have, you apply this rule for 1 extra target. Lastly, in Solar Eclipse you can spend Astral Power on Star Surges. In any AoE encounter, ideally you want to cast Convoke with Lunar Eclipse up or after Celestial Alignment. We want to do a big ass shout out to the Dreamgrove Discord community for having a lot of this information readily available for you if you want them in readable format. And of course, thank you to Bora, who especially took the time to make sure that we don't say stupid shit. This is, of course, the basic version of the Balance Druid guide. It's enough for you to quickly pick up the spec and go smash some stuffs, but there's a lot more stuff to get into Balance, like how to properly use the double on-use Trinket in your rotation for, making that #1 on the DPS meters. And if you want to know how to do that, you can check Bora's guide on icyveins.com, where he goes a lot more in depth about Balance Druid. And of course, you can also check Tettle's guide on Wowhead for a lot more in-depth balance information from one of the best Balance Druids I have personally seen. And last but not least, thank you dear patrons for supporting our channel so much. We're so pumping hard in 2021 and it's only going to get better. And dear viewer, if you want to support us a little bit more, you can check the link down below where you'll find the Patreon link with some cool stuff waiting for you. And thank you for watching the video. Catch us on twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline where we stream this shit. And we'll see you the next time.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.